Good day to all of you. Thank you for joining. My name is Marie-France Paquet. I'm the Chief Economist at Global Affairs Canada. And today I will present you how to assess the potential economic impact of a trade agreement on gender. So Canada's embarked on an inclusive trade approach a few years ago, and we'll look at the different dimension, gender, immigrants, Indigenous people. We want to understand and make sure that all segments of society can participate into international trade and benefit from it as well. We do recognize that some barriers to trade exist and that trade liberalization effects have not necessarily been equal for men and women. So we have different portions of this research agenda. So we do have some exposed analysis of different FTAs and its impact on gender. We also look at women-owned small and medium-sized enterprises, their role into international trade, the barriers they face. We have quite a good body of research on GBA plus, so gender-based analysis plus of our free trade agreement, chapter by chapter, in the case of the Canada-US-Mexico agreement. But today I will be talking to you about the ex-ante assessment. So the traditional way of doing it is we use a computable general equilibrium modeling approach. And of course, it allows for a lot of sectors, a lot of countries in the model. We put the new terms of a free trade agreement. We run the model. We let sectors adjust, across sectors and over time and a few years out, we look at the potential impacts. So what we can see, of course, is changes in terms of trade, changes in trade patterns. We want to know in terms of exports and imports and production, consumption, income, and overall GDP. So that is pretty standard. Of course, the main shortcomings are that we don't get any information on the well-being of different economic agents out of these type of models. And the labor market actually offers no friction at all. It is assumed that we have full employment at every point in time. So that is, of course, a big criticism of this type of approach, as we recognize that in real economic life, at every point in time, we have a bit of unemployment. So the new model that we have developed at Global Affairs Canada introduces a labor market module. So it is our typical CGE model, augmented, if you will, by a labor market module. So we do have complete working age population, this aggregated by gender, occupations. We have 8 occupations, income, and it includes unemployment and people not in the labor force. So that is definitely a big departure from traditional modeling. So we have an intertemporal labor market adjustment with an overlapping generation structure in it. So that allows us, of course, to let sectors adjust to a trade shock, of course, and workers can go from one occupation to the other as they age throughout the time frame within the model. So we have an intertemporal occupation transition matrix that allows people to move from one occupation to another, or from an occupation in period T to unemployment or not in the labor force in the following period. So the type of data that so the new features, of course, will allow us to have overall economic impact assessment as usual, but it will allow us now to have disaggregated potential impacts on labor by gender, occupation, and age group. So the richness in the results, of course, means that it is very demanding in terms of data to be put in the system to develop the labor market module. So we use 2 main sources from Statistics Canada, our national statistical agency. One is the Census of Population 2016, and the other one is the Survey of Labor and Income Dynamics, which is a longitudinal survey from 1993 to 2004. So we use that to develop the said transition matrix. So the first set of data is simply to say, okay, these are how out of the census population that we have, men and women are separated in terms of different types of occupation. What you can see is we have a lot more male in the managers category than we have female. And for example, we have a lot more male in machine operators and drivers than women. And we have, let's say, in terms of clerical administration, a lot more women than men in that category. Okay, so that is based on actual data from the population. Then we have with the Survey of Labor Income Dynamics, we devised this mobility matrix for men and we have another one for women. So they are different and they take into account actual real data in the Canadian economy. So this tells you that at period T, most of the managers that are men will remain managers the following year. Some will go to professional categories, some will go to the unemployment categories, and some will move out of the labor force. Okay, from the laborers, so most of them will stay laborer the next period. Some small proportion will go unemployed, and some will go not in the labor force. Okay, so that diagonal tells you the percentage of people in that occupation that will remain in the same occupation the following year. So we have new entries in the model. We have unemployment, as I said, and people not in the labor force. Okay. So we have said matrix for men, and we have a different one for women. Okay, so in this particular case, 85% of women that were managers at period time T will stay managers the following period. Some will be not in the labor force, a bit of unemployment, and different movement across occupations. So what it means is that when we shock the model with the trade agreement, with the difference in tariff concessions by different countries, it will allow the model, the labor markets, you've got demand and supply, and the labor will be able to be adjusted and with different types of workers. So there is an adjustment between men and women. So we have a high substitution elasticity between male and female workers in Canada. Then you can also substitute between different age categories of workers. Okay, so we have an elasticity there that is also very high. But between occupation, it is a lot more difficult to replace, let's say, a manager with a laborer. So in which case, the substitution degree based on the transition matrix is a much smaller, 0.35. Okay, so then what do? We've done this labor market module to see the impact on gender for the first time in the context of the Canada-US-Mexico agreement. This is a bit of a special modeling exercise because it is one where we go from the baseline, in which case it would be NO-NAFTA, which is a North American Free Trade Agreement, because that was the US position. You either sign a new deal called CUSMA or we withdraw from NAFTA. So the baseline in this particular case would have been no trade deal, no NAFTA. Okay, so we run the model as usual. So we put all the concessions in terms of tariff rate quotas, rules of origin, and the like. And we get the usual suspect in terms of output of variables. So the impact on GDP, terms of trade, different components of GDP, factor markets. And then at the very last line here, you have the new variable overall, and tells you the percentage change on the number of jobs in the economy as a result of that new agreement. Okay, so this is definitely an addition, and just like that, it doesn't seem much, but we can be disaggregating this data in many different ways, and the way here that is of interest is the gender disaggregation. And what you see is this the results of CUSMA compared to NO-NAFTA on, for example, professional people between the men and women. So we see that there's a lot more gain in this particular case for women and a bit of loss for men. A lot more gain here again for women compared to gains for men. Same thing in the sales category. Okay. But on the machinery operators, in this particular case, we see huge gains for men and smaller ones for women. This relates, of course, to the automotive sector, which is a very important one in Canada-US-Mexico agreement, and it is also dominated by men workers. So it is not surprising. So you see the difference, the disaggregation by occupation. We could look at it by age group as well. Overall, if you look at the total numbers for men and women, there's not a big difference, but the distribution across occupation is quite different. So to conclude, I would simply say that, of course, the model is very rich in terms of potential results, but it is quite demanding in terms of data. What you need to put into there is the standard CG plus all the data to be able to develop that transition matrix between occupation, between two periods, and that overlapping generation as your workers age and move out of the labor force, for example. So the results do vary depending on which country, of course, are involved in the FTA. It depends on sectors that are facing increased competition due to tariff concessions. And it also, of course, depends on workers. How are they distributed across your sectors in your economy and across occupations? Okay, so all of these things, of course, will have an influence on the output you're going to get and the degree of substitution between different types of workers by gender, by age, and occupation also matters. So what we have done is calibrate everything to the Canadian economy using the census data and the survey of labor income dynamics. And for us, the next step is actually, of course, we will be using this model when we go and try to assess the potential economic impact of new free trade agreements. But we will also try to take it a step further and to say, now that we have the impact on gender through the labor market, what can we say about income distribution of households? Okay, so that is the next big step for us. And with that, I thank you very much. Hope you have a wonderful day.